The blood on Victoria Owens's lip had dried by the time she stumbled into the saloon that September afternoon in 1882. But everyone in Santa Rosa, California, could still see the mark of a man's fist blooming purple across her delicate cheekbone. The piano player's fingers stumbled over the keys as she pushed through the door, and 30 pairs of eyes turned to stare at the banker's girl who had always seemed so pristine, so untouchable in her fine dresses and silk gloves. Now her green dress was torn at the shoulder, her dark hair tangled loose from its pins, and her brown eyes carried a wildness that made grown men look away in shame. Lucas Crawford sat at a corner table nursing his third whiskey of the day when she entered, and unlike the others, he did not avert his gaze. The cowboy had drifted into town only 2 weeks prior, taking work at the Henderson Ranch 5 miles south, and he had learned quickly that Santa Rosa operated under one man's iron grip. Richard Pemberton owned the bank, the mercantile, half the land in the county, and apparently he thought he owned people too. Lucas watched Victoria scan the room with desperate eyes, seeking something he could not name, and when their gazes locked across the smoky interior, he saw her shoulders tremble with either relief or fresh terror. She walked straight toward him, her boots clicking on the wooden floor, and the saloon fell into an eerie silence broken only by the creak of the building settling and someone's nervous cough. Lucas set down his glass slowly, his weathered hand steady despite the whiskey, and waited. He was 26 years old, lean and sun-bronzed from years working cattle drives from Texas to Montana, and he had seen enough of the world's ugliness to recognize it when it walked through a door wearing a pretty face and a torn dress. "You are new in town," Victoria said when she reached his table, her voice surprisingly firm despite the tremor in her hands. "That means you do not owe Richard Pemberton anything yet." Lucas leaned back in his chair, studying her face with careful attention. Up close, he could see the split in her lip was fresh, perhaps an hour old, and there were finger-shaped bruises emerging on her forearms where someone had gripped her with vicious intent. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm and low when he spoke. "I do not owe any man anything, new to town or not. What do you need?" Victoria glanced over her shoulder at the bartender, who had suddenly become very interested in polishing the same glass over and over. She pulled out the chair across from Lucas and sat without invitation, leaning forward so her words would not carry beyond their table. "I need someone to help me leave Santa Rosa, tonight, before he comes looking for me. The man who did that to your face." She touched her cheek unconsciously, then dropped her hand as if ashamed of the gesture. "Richard Pemberton. He asked me to marry him 6 months ago, and my father was so pleased because it would secure our family's future. The Owens name might sound respectable, but we have been drowning in debt since my mother died. Pemberton promised to forgive everything if I became his wife." Lucas poured himself another whiskey from the bottle on the table, then pushed his glass toward her instead. She took it without hesitation and drank deeply, wincing as the alcohol touched her split lip. When she set the glass down, her eyes were watering, but her voice remained steady. "I tried to be what he wanted. I smiled at his dinners, I let him court me properly. I convinced myself that affection might grow with time. But today, when he tried to kiss me, I pulled away because his breath smelled like cigars and whiskey and something rotten underneath. He did not like that. He said I belonged to him, that he had paid for me with my father's debts, and when I told him I would never marry him, he showed me exactly what he thought of women who defied him." The cowboy's blue eyes had gone cold and hard as winter ice. He had known men like Pemberton before, men who believed their money granted them dominion over others, who took what they wanted and crushed anyone who resisted. Lucas had spent the last 8 years of his life drifting from place to place precisely to avoid putting down roots in towns where such men held power. But something about Victoria Owens sitting across from him with blood on her mouth and fire in her eyes made him reconsider his usual policy of non-involvement. "Where would you go?" San Francisco. "I have an aunt there, my mother's sister, who never approved of the arrangement with Pemberton. She would take me in, I know she would, but I cannot get there alone. Pemberton has men watching the stage depot and the train station. He will be looking for me as soon as he realizes I am not coming back to apologize." Lucas considered this, turning possibilities over in his mind like cards in a poker hand. The smart play would be to finish his drink, wish her luck, and walk away. He had no stake in this town or its politics, no reason to make an enemy of the richest man in the county, for the sake of a woman he had known for all of 5 minutes. But Lucas Crawford had learned long ago that the smart play and the right play were not always the same thing, and something in Victoria's desperate courage called to a part of him he had thought buried years ago. "I have a horse," he said finally. "A good one, strong enough to carry 2. We can leave after dark, cut north through the hills instead of taking the main road. It will be rougher going, but we can make it to the next town by morning and catch the northbound stage from there." Victoria's eyes widened, and for the first time since entering the saloon, her rigid composure cracked enough to let hope shine through. "You would do this. You do not even know me." "I know enough. And I have never been fond of bullies, especially the rich ones who think they can buy and break people like property." He stood, tossing coins on the table to cover his tab. "Do you have anything you need to collect? Family you need to say goodbye to?" Her expression darkened. "My father made his choice when he promised me to Pemberton. I owe him nothing. Everything I truly care about I am already wearing." She touched a locket at her throat, tarnished silver that held no monetary value but clearly meant everything to her. "This was my mother's. It is all I need." "Then meet me behind the livery stable at midnight. Stay out of sight until then." "Can you do that?" Victoria nodded, rising from the chair with renewed determination straightening her spine. "I can do that. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. I do not know why you would help me, but I will not forget it. Just Lucas. And you can thank me when we are both far away from Santa Rosa." She slipped out of the saloon as quietly as she had entered, leaving Lucas to consider what he had just agreed to. The other patrons gradually returned to their drinking and card games, though he caught more than one man watching him with speculation in their eyes. News traveled fast in small towns, and he had no doubt that Pemberton would hear about this encounter before sunset. That was fine. Lucas had faced down angry ranchers, rustlers, and once, a Comanche war party that had separated from the main tribe during the Red River War back in '74. One rich banker with delusions of lordship did not frighten him, though he suspected the man's money could make trouble in ways more dangerous than simple violence. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. Lucas returned to his rented room above the general store and gathered his few possessions into saddlebags, then checked and rechecked his Winchester rifle and the Colt revolver at his hip. He was not looking for a fight, but 8 years on the frontier had taught him the value of being prepared for one. As the sun sank toward the coastal hills west of town, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson, he made his way to the livery stable where his horse, a rangy buckskin gelding named Ranger, waited in a stall. The stable boy, a freckled kid of maybe 15, looked up nervously as Lucas began saddling his horse. "Mr. Crawford, sir, there was a man here asking about you. Big fellow with a silver watch chain and a mean way of talking. He wanted to know if you were planning to leave town." "What did you tell him?" Nothing, sir. I said I just work here and do not keep track of the guest's business, but he left money, said I should send word if I saw you packing up. The boy held out $3 with a guilty expression. I have not earned this, and I do not reckon I should. Lucas smiled despite the tension coiling in his gut. You are a good kid. Keep the money. You earned it by having more integrity than the man who gave it to you. But do me a favor and wait until morning to mention you saw me. Can you do that? The boy nodded eagerly, pocketing the coins. Yes, sir. I can do that for certain. Good man. Lucas finished saddling Ranger, then led the horse to an empty stall in the back where it would not be visible from the street. He settled in to wait, sitting on a hay bale with his rifle across his knees, and watched the light fade from the sky beyond the stable's open doors. Midnight came with agonizing slowness, but when it finally arrived, Victoria appeared like a ghost from the shadows behind the stable, still wearing her torn green dress, but with a woolen shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the September chill. She carried nothing except the clothes on her back and the locket at her throat, and Lucas felt a surge of admiration for her courage. Leaving everything you knew with nothing but faith in a stranger's word took a kind of strength most people never discovered in themselves. Ready? He asked quietly, leading Ranger out of the stall. As ready as I will ever be. She looked at the horse with some trepidation. I should warn you, I have not ridden much. My father always insisted it was unladylike for me to ride astride. Well, tonight we are not worried about ladylike behavior. Just hold on tight and trust the horse. Ranger is steady. He will not throw you. Lucas swung into the saddle, then reached down to help Victoria up behind him. She settled awkwardly at first, trying to figure out where to put her hands until he took her wrists and pulled her arms around his waist. Like that. Hold on and do not let go, no matter what happens. He felt her nod against his back, her breath warm through his shirt, and then they were moving, walking Ranger slowly through the back alleys of Santa Rosa toward the northern edge of town. The streets were mostly empty at this hour. Just a few drunks stumbling home from the saloons, and the occasional dog barking at shadows. Lucas kept to the darkest paths, avoiding the main thoroughfare where Pemberton's men might be watching, and they were almost clear of the last buildings when a voice called out from the darkness ahead. That is far enough, Cowboy. Lucas reined Ranger to a halt, his hand moving instinctively to the Colt at his hip. 3 men materialized from the shadows of a closed mercantile, all carrying rifles, all wearing the hard expressions of men paid to do violence. The one who had spoken was older than the others, maybe 40, with a scarred face and the bow-legged stance of someone who had spent too many years in the saddle doing work that left marks on the soul. Mr. Pemberton wants the lady returned, the scarred man said, not raising his rifle but keeping it ready across his chest. He says there has been a misunderstanding that needs clearing up. You ride out, Cowboy, and we will forget you were involved. This is not your fight. Victoria's arms tightened around Lucas's waist, and he could feel her heart hammering against his back. He kept his voice level and calm, the tone of a man who would not be moved by threats or intimidation. The lady does not want to go back. That makes it her choice, not Pemberton's. You 3 should step aside and let us pass. The scarred man shook his head slowly. Cannot do that. Mr. Pemberton pays us well to handle situations like this, and we have never failed him yet. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. Lucas felt the familiar cold calculation settling over him, the mental arithmetic of violence that had kept him alive through range wars and desperate situations. 3 armed men against 1, with a civilian at his back who could be hurt in any crossfire. The odds were poor, but not impossible. Still, guns blazing was a last resort, and he had one more card to play before it came to that. "You boys know who Richard Pemberton really is?" Lucas asked conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather instead of standing on the edge of bloodshed. "Not the rich banker who signs your pay, but the man underneath all that money and fine clothing." The scarred man frowned, uncertain where this was going. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about a man who beats women when they do not do what he wants. I am talking about a coward who hides behind hired guns instead of facing his problems himself. You might take his money, but are you really willing to die for him? Because that is what is about to happen if you do not step aside. I will kill all three of you before I let you take this woman back to be hurt again, and you need to ask yourselves if $20 a week is worth a bullet." The three men exchanged glances, and Lucas saw doubt flicker across their faces. They were hard men, certainly, but not monsters. There was a line most people would not cross, and returning a terrified woman to her abuser might be on the wrong side of that line, even for hired muscle. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring, and Lucas kept his hand near his gun, ready to draw if words failed. Finally, the scarred man lowered his rifle and spat into the dirt. "Get out of here. I did not see nothing, and neither did these boys. But you best ride fast and far, Cowboy, because Pemberton will not forgive this. He has reached beyond Santa Rosa, and he carries a grudge like some men carry water." "I will take my chances." Lucas tipped his hat slightly. "Much obliged for your good sense." He urged Ranger forward, and the three men stepped aside to let them pass. Victoria did not speak until they were well beyond the town limits, climbing into the dark hills where oak trees clustered thick, and the night insects sang their endless chorus. Only then did she release a shaking breath and loosen her death grip on his waist. "You would have fought them," she said, wonder and horror mixing in her voice. "3 armed men, and you would have drawn on them to protect me." "I would have tried. Might not have won, but I would have tried." "Why, you do not know me. We met hours ago. Why would you risk your life for me?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment, guiding Ranger carefully up the rocky trail as the horse picked its way through the darkness. The question was fair, and he owed her an honest answer, even if he was not entirely sure of it himself. 8 years ago, I watched my sister get married to a man my father approved of, a wealthy rancher twice her age who promised to expand our family's holdings. Within 6 months, she was writing me letters begging for help, saying he hurt her when he drank, which was most nights. By the time I made it back to Texas, she had run off, and nobody knew where she went. I have been looking for her ever since, following rumors and faint trails that never lead anywhere. So maybe I am helping you because I could not help her. Maybe I am trying to balance some cosmic ledger. Or maybe I just recognize courage when I see it, and I think anyone brave enough to walk into a saloon and ask a stranger for help deserves someone to stand with them." Victoria was silent behind him, and when she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I hope you find her. Your sister, I mean. I hope she is safe somewhere, living the life she chose. So do I. Every day I hope exactly that." They rode through the night, following deer trails and ridge lines that Lucas navigated more by instinct than sight. The half-moon provided barely enough light to see by, and twice they had to dismount and lead Ranger through particularly treacherous stretches, where loose rock could send horse and riders tumbling down the hillside. Victoria never complained, though Lucas knew the rough travel must be taking a toll on someone unaccustomed to riding. She held on with quiet determination, and when they finally stopped to rest a few hours before dawn, she slid from the saddle with a barely suppressed groan of pain. "I apologize," she said, stretching her back. "I am not used to this kind of travel. You are doing fine. Better than fine, actually. Most people would be complaining by now." Lucas tied Ranger to a scrub oak and pulled out his canteen, offering it to Victoria first. She drank gratefully, then handed it back and settled onto a flat rock with a sigh. "Where did you learn to navigate like this? In the dark, through country you cannot possibly know, you pick things up on cattle drives." "I have been working ranches since I was 18, moving herds from breeding grounds to rail heads, sometimes traveling hundreds of miles through territory where there are no roads, no towns, nothing but open country and whatever dangers it holds. You learn to rid the land, to follow the natural paths animals take, and to keep your direction even when you cannot see the sun or stars." Victoria studied him in the faint moonlight, her intelligent eyes taking in details she had been too frightened to notice earlier. "You are not what I expected when I walked into that saloon. I was looking for someone desperate enough or greedy enough to help me for money. But you are neither of those things, are you?" Lucas shrugged, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. "I am just a cowboy who happened to be in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place, depending on how this plays out." "The right place," Victoria said firmly. "Definitely the right place." She paused, then added quietly, "Thank you, Lucas. Not just for helping me escape, but for treating me like a person with choices instead of property to be returned to its owner. You have no idea how much that means." They rested for an hour, letting Ranger graze on the sparse grass while Lucas kept watch for any signs of pursuit. When the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, they mounted up again and continued north, descending from the hills into a valley where a small farming community called Healdsburg sat alongside the Russian River. They reached it just as the town was waking, shopkeepers opening their doors and farmers heading to their fields, and Lucas went straight to the stage depot while Victoria waited with Ranger in a grove of cottonwood trees. The stage north to Ukiah would leave in 2 hours, with connections to San Francisco from there. Lucas purchased 2 tickets, using most of the money he had saved from his work at the Henderson Ranch, then returned to Victoria with the news. Her face lit up with relief so profound, it transformed her features, making her look younger and more hopeful than she had any right to after the ordeal she had endured. "I can pay you back," she said quickly. "When I reach my aunt, I can send you the money. Keep your money. You will need it more than I will. Starting over is not cheap. Then how can I ever repay you?" Lucas looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in the growing daylight, and saw not just a frightened woman fleeing an abuser, but a person of remarkable strength, who had made an impossible choice and followed through with it. Something stirred in his chest, a feeling he had not allowed himself in years, and he pushed it down firmly. This was not about him or his feelings. This was about getting Victoria to safety, nothing more. Just live well. Make a good life for yourself in San Francisco. That will be payment enough. The stage depot had a small restaurant attached where travelers could get breakfast before their journey, and Lucas insisted Victoria eat something despite her protests that she was too nervous to be hungry. She managed some eggs and toast while Lucas drank strong black coffee and watched the street for any sign of Pemberton or his men. The town remained peaceful, farmers and merchants going about their business with no indication that a manhunt was underway. Perhaps they had actually managed to slip away clean, or perhaps the storm was simply gathering strength before it broke. When the stage finally arrived, pulled by 6 fresh horses and driven by a grizzled old man who introduced himself as Chester, Lucas helped Victoria aboard and then climbed in after her. 2 other passengers were already seated inside, a matronly woman with a basket of knitting and a salesman type with a sample case, both of whom nodded politely and then returned to their own concerns. The stage lurched into motion with a crack of Chester's whip, and Santa Rosa fell away behind them, growing smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely beyond a bend in the road. Victoria sat pressed against the window, watching the landscape roll by with an expression somewhere between wonder and disbelief. "I cannot believe we actually did it. I keep thinking I will wake up and discover this is a dream, that I am still in Pemberton's parlor with his hands around my throat." The matronly woman looked up sharply from her knitting. "Are you quite all right, dear? You look like you have been through an ordeal." Victoria touched her bruised cheek self-consciously. "I am fine now, or at least I will be soon." The woman's eyes narrowed with understanding, and she reached across to pat Victoria's hand. "Good for you, dear. Too many women stay in situations that break them. It takes courage to leave." "I had help," Victoria said, glancing at Lucas with a small smile. "I could not have done it alone." The salesman cleared his throat uncomfortably, clearly not wanting to be involved in whatever domestic drama was unfolding, and buried himself in a newspaper. Lucas leaned back against the hard bench and tipped his hat over his eyes, partly to rest and partly to give Victoria space to process everything that had happened. The stage rolled on through the morning, following the Russian River north through country that grew gradually wilder and more forested as they left the settled farmland behind. They were perhaps 20 miles from Healdsburg when Lucas heard the sound of horses approaching fast from behind. He pushed his hat back and leaned out the window, squinting against the dust being kicked up by the stage wheels, and counted 4 riders closing the distance with grim determination. Even from a distance, he recognized the scarred man from the previous night, along with 3 others who were either the same men or similar enough to make no difference. "Trouble," he said quietly, and Victoria went pale. "Pemberton, his men at least." Lucas pulled his rifle from where he had stowed it and checked the load, then rapped on the ceiling of the stage to get Chester's attention. The driver's weathered face appeared in the small window that connected the passenger compartment to the driver's box. "What is it?" "4 riders coming up fast behind us, and they are not friendly. Can you get more speed out of these horses?" Chester spat a stream of tobacco juice and grinned, showing 3 missing teeth. "Can I get more speed? Boy, I have been outrunning bandits and Indians since before you were born." "Hold on to your hats, folks." The whip cracked like a gunshot, and the stage surged forward as the horses broke into a full gallop. The matronly woman shrieked and grabbed for the leather strap hanging from the ceiling, while the salesman's newspaper went flying and Victoria braced herself against the side of the stage with white knuckles. Lucas kept his focus on the riders behind them, watching as they pushed their horses harder to close the gap. They were gaining, but slowly, and if Chester could maintain this pace for even a few miles, they might reach Ukiah where the local law could intervene. The problem was maintaining that pace on rough roads with a heavy stage and 6 horses. Within minutes, Lucas could hear the animals laboring, their breathing harsh even over the thunder of hooves and the rattle of wheels. The riders behind were getting closer, spreading out to flank the stage on both sides, and Lucas made a decision he hoped he would not regret. He leaned out the window, braced the rifle against the frame, and fired a shot that kicked up dirt 10 feet in front of the lead rider's horse. "Next one goes through your chest," he shouted over the noise. "Turn back now," the scarred man responded by drawing his own rifle, and suddenly the air was full of gunfire. Lucas ducked back inside as a bullet punched through the side of the stage inches from his head, sending splinters flying. The matronly woman was screaming now, and the salesman had curled himself into a ball on the floor. Victoria grabbed Lucas's arm, her eyes wide with terror. "What do we do?" "Stay down and trust me," Lucas said, then leaned out again and fired 3 quick shots, aiming for the horses rather than the riders. He hated shooting animals, but wounding a horse would stop its rider more surely than trying for a kill shot on a moving target from a bouncing stage. His third shot found its mark, and one of the pursuing horses went down in a tumbling crash that sent its rider flying and forced the others to veer aside to avoid the wreck. That left 3 riders, and they were close enough now that Lucas could see the fury on the scarred man's face. The man raised his rifle again, and this time his shot was more accurate, shattering the window on the opposite side of the stage and causing the salesman to scream in a pitch that rivaled the matronly woman's. Lucas levered another round into his Winchester and took careful aim despite the wild jouncing of the stage, leading his target the way he would lead a running deer. When he fired, the scarred man jerked backward in his saddle and nearly fell before catching himself. Blood bloomed on his shoulder, but he stayed mounted, and his face twisted with pain and rage. "Stop the damn stage," the man roared. "Stop it now, or I swear we will kill every one of you." Chester's response was to push the horses even harder, though Lucas could tell they were nearly spent. Sweat foam flew from their necks, and their stride was becoming ragged with exhaustion. They could not maintain this pace much longer, and the remaining riders knew it. They were content to hang back now, conserving their horses' strength, waiting for the inevitable moment when the stage would have to slow or risk killing the team. That moment came sooner than Lucas hoped. As they rounded a sharp bend, one of the wheel horses stumbled, and Chester had no choice but to slow the pace or risk overturning the entire stage. The speed bled away from full gallop to canter to trot, and the 3 riders closed in with weapons ready. Lucas had 4 rounds left in his rifle and 6 in his revolver, which meant he needed to make each shot count against 3 men who were angry, determined, and being paid well enough to risk their lives. "Chester," Lucas called, "stop the stage. Let me handle this." "You sure about that, son?" "No, but do it anyway." The stage rolled to a halt in a cloud of dust, and Lucas stepped out with his rifle held low but ready. The 3 riders formed a semicircle around the stage, all holding guns but none pointing them directly at him yet. The scarred man clutched his bleeding shoulder with one hand while holding his rifle with the other, and his voice was tight with pain when he spoke. "You are starting to irritate me, Cowboy. That was a good horse you shot back there, worth more than you will earn in a year. And this bullet in my shoulder is going to take weeks to heal, if it does not fester and kill me first. You have caused Mr. Pemberton considerable trouble, and he does not forget things like that." "Then I guess Pemberton and I have something in common, because I do not forget men who beat women and try to buy people like livestock. Your boss is a coward and a bully, and I would tell him that to his face if he had the courage to show it instead of sending you to do his dirty work." One of the other riders, a younger man with a thin mustache, bristled at the insult. "You should watch your mouth. Mr. Pemberton is a respected businessman, and he has every right to collect what belongs to him." "She is not property," Lucas said flatly. "She is a person, and she made her choice. You need to respect that choice and ride away while you still can." The scarred man laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "While we still can. You are 1 man with 1 gun against 3 of us. The only choice here is whether you die quick or slow." Lucas felt time slow down the way it always did in moments like this, every detail becoming sharp and clear. He could see the sweat on the horses, the way the younger man's hand trembled slightly on his rifle, the calculating look in the scarred man's eyes as he weighed his options. Behind him, Lucas could hear Victoria breathing fast and shallow inside the stage, terrified but trying not to show it. He thought about his sister, wherever she was, and hoped someone had stood up for her the way he was standing up for Victoria now. "Then I guess we find out what I am made of," Lucas said quietly, and raised his rifle. The scarred man moved first, bringing his weapon up despite the wound in his shoulder, and Lucas fired before the man could complete the motion. The shot took him in the chest and knocked him backward off his horse, dead before he hit the ground. The young man with the mustache jerked in surprise and fired wild, his bullet whistling past Lucas's ear close enough to feel the heat. Lucas worked the lever and fired again, aiming low, and the young man's leg buckled as the bullet shattered his kneecap. He fell from his horse screaming, clutching his ruined leg, while his rifle clattered away into the dirt. That left one rider, an older man with gray in his beard who had not fired a shot. He sat on his horse with his rifle pointed at the ground, watching Lucas with sad, tired eyes, and slowly shook his head. "I am done," he said simply. "This is not what I signed up for, and that is not enough money to die over." He turned his horse and rode back the way they had come, not looking back, and Lucas let him go. The young man with the shattered knee was still screaming, and Lucas walked over to check on him, keeping his rifle ready in case it was a trick. It was not. The man's leg was a mess of blood and splintered bone, and his face was white with shock and pain. Lucas used his belt to fashion a tourniquet above the wound, pulling it tight enough to slow the bleeding, then stood and looked down at him without pity. "You will live if someone gets you to a doctor soon. I suggest you tell Pemberton that if he sends anyone else after Victoria Owens, they had better bring more men and a lot more skill. Now lie there and think about the choices that brought you to this moment." He walked back to the stage where Chester had climbed down to check on his passengers. The matronly woman was still crying softly, and the salesman looked like he might faint at any moment. But Victoria was standing beside the stage with her chin up and her hands clenched into fists. When Lucas approached, she threw her arms around him without warning, hugging him so tightly he could barely breathe. "You could have been killed," she said into his chest. "You could have died because of me." Lucas awkwardly patted her back, aware of Chester and the other passengers watching with interest. "But I was not. We are both fine, and those men will not bother us again." She pulled back to look up at him, and Lucas was struck by how beautiful she was despite the bruises and the torn dress and the lingering fear in her eyes. There was strength there, and intelligence, and a warmth that called to something deep in his chest he had been trying to ignore since the moment she walked into the saloon. This was not the time or place for such thoughts, but they came anyway, stubborn and insistent as weeds growing through stone. "We should keep moving," he said, stepping back to break the moment. "That third man might come back with reinforcements, and I would rather not fight another battle today if we can avoid it." Chester spat another stream of tobacco. "Amen to that. Everyone back aboard, and let us get to Ukiah before anything else tries to kill us." The remainder of the journey passed without incident, though everyone in the stage remained tense and jumpy, starting at every unexpected sound. They reached Ukiah by mid-afternoon, and Lucas helped Victoria down from the stage with the kind of careful courtesy that made her smile despite everything. The town was larger than Healdsburg, with a proper hotel and multiple stage lines running north and south. Lucas checked the schedule and found a stage to San Francisco leaving the following morning, which meant they would need to spend the night in Ukiah. He rented 2 rooms at the hotel, insisting on paying despite Victoria's protests, and they parted ways to clean up and rest before dinner. Lucas used the basin in his room to wash the dust and powder smoke from his face and hands, then sat on the bed and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. He had killed a man, wounded another, and made an enemy of someone powerful enough to cause problems for years to come. All for a woman he barely knew, because she had walked into a saloon with courage in her eyes and asked for help. His sister would have approved, he thought. Wherever she was, whatever name she went by now, she would have wanted him to do exactly what he did. There was a knock on his door an hour later, and he opened it to find Victoria standing in the hallway, wearing a simple blue dress she must have purchased from one of the local shops. Someone had helped her wash and pin up her dark hair, and the worst of the bruises on her face had been covered with powder that did not quite hide the damage, but made it less obvious. She looked almost like a different person, poised and confident, though her eyes still carried shadows that would take time to fade. "I thought perhaps we could have dinner together," she said, "if that would not be inappropriate." Lucas smiled and offered his arm. "I think we are past worrying about what is appropriate. Dinner sounds good." The hotel dining room served a decent meal of roasted chicken and vegetables, and they ate in comfortable silence for a while before Victoria set down her fork and looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "What will you do now? After you put me on the stage tomorrow, where will you go?" Lucas had been asking himself the same question. The simple answer would be to return to the Henderson ranch and collect his pay, then drift on to the next job like he always did. But something had changed in him over the past day, some fundamental shift he was still trying to understand. The thought of going back to Santa Rosa, even briefly, felt wrong, and the thought of watching Victoria ride away to San Francisco felt worse. "I have not decided yet. Maybe I will head up to Oregon, see if there is work on the ranches up there. Or maybe I will try something different. I have been drifting for 8 years, and it might be time to see what putting down roots feels like." "You could come to San Francisco," Victoria said quietly. "Not with me, I mean. I would not presume. But it is a big city with plenty of opportunities for a man with your skills. You could start fresh somewhere Pemberton's reach does not extend. You would want me in San Francisco, after everything that just happened. I would want to know you were safe and well. I would want to think that maybe someday, when I have had time to heal and learn who I am without someone trying to control me, we might have dinner again, somewhere with better food than this." She smiled, and it transformed her face. "You saved my life, Lucas Crawford. That creates a bond between people, whether we want it or not. I would like to see where that bond leads if you are willing to find out." Lucas felt something warm unfold in his chest, a feeling he had not allowed himself in far too long. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of something that could become love given time and care. Victoria was not asking for promises or declarations, just the possibility of a future they could explore together. That seemed like something worth pursuing, worth taking a risk on. "San Francisco, then," he said, raising his glass of water and a toast. "To new beginnings." Victoria clinked her glass against his. "To new beginnings, and to cowboys brave enough to face down rich men for strangers in saloons." They finished dinner and walked through Ukiah's small downtown, looking in shop windows and talking about everything and nothing. Victoria told him about growing up as the only child of parents who had once been wealthy, but lost everything in a series of bad investments. She spoke about her mother's death from consumption 3 years earlier, and how her father had retreated into himself afterward, becoming desperate to restore the family's financial position by any means necessary. Lucas shared stories from his years on cattle drives, the dangerous river crossings and stampedes and long, lonely nights under stars that stretched from horizon to horizon. He did not talk about his sister, but Victoria seemed to understand that some wounds were still too fresh to examine, even after 8 years. When they returned to the hotel, they stood in the hallway between their rooms for a long moment, neither quite ready to say good night. Finally, Victoria reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm and soft against his calloused palm. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything. I know I have already said it, but it bears repeating. You changed my life, Lucas. You gave me back my freedom and my future. I will never forget that." Lucas squeezed her hand gently. "You changed mine too, Victoria. I just did not know I needed changing until I met you." She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, a brief touch of lips against skin that sent electricity racing through his veins, then slipped into her room and closed the door. Lucas stood in the hallway for several minutes afterward, touching the place where she had kissed him, before finally retreating to his own room. He lay awake for a long time that night, watching moonlight paint patterns on the ceiling and thinking about the strange twists of fate that had brought him to this moment. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and they boarded the San Francisco stage with a dozen other passengers making the long journey west to the coast. Lucas had purchased a ticket for himself, though Victoria still did not know it, planning to surprise her when she thought they were saying goodbye. When the moment came and she prepared to board, turning to face him with tears already welling in her eyes, he stepped forward and climbed up beside her. "What are you doing?" she asked, confusion and hope warring in her expression. "Coming with you. That is, if you do not mind the company. I figured San Francisco is as good a place as any to put down roots, and I would hate to miss out on that better dinner you mentioned." Victoria laughed, a sound of pure joy that made every passenger turn to look, and threw her arms around his neck. "You are impossible, Lucas Crawford. Impossible and wonderful, and I am so glad you walked into that saloon yesterday. It was actually you who walked in, if you want to be technical about it. Shut up and accept the compliment." The stage journey to San Francisco took 2 days of hard travel through the Coast Range Mountains and down into the valleys that led to the bay. They talked for hours, learning the small details about each other that mattered more than grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Lucas discovered that Victoria loved to read, that she could recite poetry from memory, and that she had a sharp wit that emerged once the fear began to fade. Victoria learned that Lucas had taught himself to read from newspapers and dime novels during long nights around campfires, that he played a decent harmonica, and that underneath his quiet exterior lived a man of deep conviction who would fight for what was right even when it cost him. By the time they reached San Francisco, rumbling down Market Street past buildings taller than anything Lucas had ever seen, he knew with complete certainty that what he felt for Victoria Owens was more than just attraction or protective instinct. It was the beginning of love, real and true and terrifying in its intensity. They found Victoria's aunt living in a narrow townhouse in the Mission District, a tiny, fierce woman named Margaret who took one look at her niece's bruised face and pulled her into a hug that lasted 5 minutes. When Victoria introduced Lucas as the man who had saved her, Margaret studied him with sharp green eyes that reminded him powerfully of her niece, then nodded as if he had passed some invisible test. "You will stay for dinner," she announced, brooking no argument. "And then we will discuss what comes next for both of you." What came next unfolded over the following weeks and months with the kind of organic inevitability that characterized the best love stories. Lucas found work at a stable near the waterfront, using his knowledge of horses to build a reputation as someone who could train even the most difficult animals. Victoria enrolled in classes at a women's college, pursuing the education her father had always said was unnecessary for someone destined to be a wealthy man's wife. They saw each other nearly every day, taking long walks through Golden Gate Park, attending concerts and plays, talking until the small hours of the morning about their dreams and fears and hopes for the future. 6 months after arriving in San Francisco, Lucas rented a small apartment above a bakery and asked Victoria if she would like to have dinner there, instead of at a restaurant. She arrived with flowers and a smile that made his heart skip, and they cooked together in the tiny kitchen, burning the potatoes and laughing about it, more content than either had imagined possible. After dinner, as they stood by the window watching fog roll in from the bay, Lucas took her hand and spoke the words he had been rehearsing for weeks. "I love you, Victoria. I have loved you since you walked into that saloon with blood on your lip and fire in your eyes. I know it has not been long, and I know you have been through hell, but I want you to know that when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I would like to build a life with you. Not because I saved you or because you owe me anything, but because I cannot imagine my future without you in it." Victoria turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks, and cupped his face in her hands. "I love you too, Lucas Crawford. I think I have loved you since you agreed to help me without asking what was in it for you. You are the best man I have ever known, and yes, I want to build a life with you. I am ready now. I have been ready for months." They married in a small ceremony at Margaret's townhouse 3 months later, in the spring of 1883, with wildflowers blooming in window boxes and the smell of the sea drifting through open windows. Margaret stood as Victoria's witness, and the stable owner where Lucas worked stood as his, and when the justice of the peace pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in cheers that could probably be heard 3 blocks away. They honeymooned in a beach cottage south of the city, spending a week walking barefoot in the sand and making love in a bed that smelled like salt air and new beginnings. When they returned to San Francisco, they moved into a larger apartment and began building the life they had both dreamed of during those long conversations. Lucas eventually saved enough money to purchase a half interest in the stable where he worked, turning it into one of the most successful operations in the city. Victoria graduated from college with honors and took a position teaching at a school for girls, inspiring a generation of young women to pursue their own dreams rather than settling for what society dictated. They talked often about having children, but agreed to wait until they felt more established, more certain that they could provide the kind of stable, loving home neither had fully experienced in their own childhoods. 2 years after their marriage, in the summer of 1885, Victoria came home from school with news that made her eyes shine with joy and apprehension. She was pregnant. The doctor had confirmed it that morning, and their child would arrive in early winter. Lucas picked her up and spun her around the apartment, laughing with delight, and they spent the evening planning nurseries and choosing names and imagining what their child might look like. Their son, Michael, was born in December during a rare San Francisco snowfall, arriving with healthy lungs and a full head of dark hair. Lucas held him for the first time and felt something break open in his chest, a well of love so deep it almost frightened him. He promised that tiny, perfect human that he would always be protected, always be loved, and never be used as a pawn in someone else's ambitions. Victoria watched from the bed with exhausted joy, and when Lucas brought Michael to her, she traced the baby's features with a gentle finger and whispered thank you to the universe for bringing her to that saloon on that September afternoon 3 years earlier. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after Michael's arrival. The stable thrived under Lucas's management, and Victoria returned to teaching after a few months, with Margaret happily taking over grandmother duties during the days. They moved to a small house with a yard where Michael could play, in a neighborhood full of other young families building lives in the city's expanding districts. Lucas never stopped looking for information about his sister, following leads and posting inquiries, but the search became less desperate and more hopeful, a thing he did because he refused to give up rather than because it consumed him. On Michael's third birthday, as they celebrated with cake and neighbors, and the chaos of small children running through the house, there was a knock at the door. Lucas opened it to find a woman in her 30s with red hair and his mother's eyes, standing on his porch with a carpetbag in one hand and tears streaming down her face. Sarah. His sister Sarah, who had been missing for 11 years, who he had almost given up hope of ever finding. "Hello, brother," she said quietly. "I heard through some friends that Lucas Crawford was looking for a Sarah Crawford, and I thought I should come see if it was you." Lucas pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried, asking no questions, making no demands, just grateful beyond words that she was alive and had found her way back to him. Later, after she had met Victoria and Michael and eaten dinner with them, Sarah told her story. She had fled her abusive husband and made her way to Oregon, where she had been working as a seamstress under a different name, too ashamed to contact her family because she thought they would judge her for leaving her marriage. When she heard that Lucas was searching for her, that he had never stopped looking, she realized that maybe she had been wrong to hide. Maybe family meant something different than she had always believed. Sarah stayed with them for several weeks, healing and reconnecting, before deciding to open her own dress shop in San Francisco. She became a regular fixture in their lives, a beloved aunt to Michael and later to his sister Emma, who arrived 2 years after Sarah's return. The family Lucas had thought destroyed by tragedy and distance rebuilt itself into something stronger and more beautiful than before, held together by the kind of love that comes from choosing each other rather than simply being bound by blood. Years passed in the gentle accumulation of memories and milestones. Lucas expanded the stable business into breeding and selling horses up and down the California coast, building a reputation for quality and fair dealing that brought customers from as far as Los Angeles. Victoria became headmistress of her school, fighting for better pay for her teachers and curriculum that prepared girls for university rather than just marriage. Michael grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books and horses equally, while Emma displayed her mother's fierce independence from the moment she could walk. Sarah's dress shop thrived, and she eventually married a kind clockmaker named Thomas, who treated her with the respect and affection she deserved. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas and Victoria returned to the same beach cottage where they had honeymooned, leaving the children with Sarah and Thomas for a week. They walked the same beaches, older now and marked by life but still deeply, passionately in love. On their last evening, as the sun set over the Pacific in a blaze of orange and gold, Victoria leaned against Lucas's chest and spoke softly. "You ever regret it? Helping me that day, making an enemy of Pemberton, giving up your old life to be here with me?" Lucas wrapped his arms around her and rested his chin on the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Not for 1 second, not even for a heartbeat. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Victoria. You and our children and this life we have built together. I would do it all again in an instant. Even the part where you got shot at, especially that part. It makes for a good story to tell the grandchildren someday." Victoria laughed and turned in his arms to kiss him, and in that moment, Lucas knew with absolute certainty that everything he had lost and left behind had been worth it for this. For her. For them. For the family they had created from courage and chance, and a willingness to stand up to the rich and powerful when it mattered most. The news of Richard Pemberton reached them occasionally over the years, carried by travelers and newspapers. His bank had failed during a financial panic in 1887, and he had lost most of his fortune in the crash. Without money to command respect or buy loyalty, he had faded into obscurity, just another bitter man raging at a world that no longer feared him. Lucas felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that Pemberton would never have the chance to hurt another woman the way he had hurt Victoria. As the century turned, and the 1800s gave way to the 1900s, Lucas and Victoria watched their children grow into remarkable adults. Michael attended university and became a veterinarian, carrying on his father's love of horses in a new way. Emma fought for women's suffrage alongside her mother, giving passionate speeches that inspired others to join the cause. Sarah's children, two daughters who called Lucas uncle with genuine affection, grew up knowing they had family who would always support them no matter what choices they made. In the summer of 1912, on a warm evening with the windows open to catch the breeze from the bay, Lucas and Victoria sat on their porch and watched their grandchildren play in the yard. Michael's two sons and Emma's daughter chased each other with the boundless energy of youth, their laughter carrying on the wind. Lucas held Victoria's hand, his thumb tracing the familiar lines of her palm, and thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. How a single moment of courage, a single decision to help someone in need, could cascade into decades of love and joy and meaning. "What are you thinking about?" Victoria asked, reading his expression the way she had learned to do over 30 years of marriage. "About that September day in Santa Rosa. About how terrified you must have been, walking into that saloon full of strangers. About how close we came to never meeting at all." Victoria squeezed his hand. "But we did meet, and you were brave enough to help when you did not have to. That is what matters. You were the brave one. I just followed your lead. Then we were brave together. We have been doing everything together for 30 years now, and I would not change a single moment of it." Lucas leaned over and kissed her forehead, a gesture of affection worn smooth by countless repetitions, but no less meaningful for its familiarity. "Neither would I, my love. Neither would I." The evening stretched on, full of children's laughter and the distant sound of fog horns from the bay, and the comfortable silence of two people who had built something lasting from courage and love. Lucas Crawford, the cowboy who had once drifted from place to place with no purpose beyond the next job, had finally found his home. Not in a location, though he loved San Francisco with its hills and fog and cosmopolitan energy, but in the woman beside him and the family they had created together. Victoria Owens, who had fled an abusive rich man with nothing but a locket and her own fierce will, had found safety and love and a life beyond her wildest dreams. Their story became legend within their family, passed down through generations as a reminder that courage in the face of powerful opposition could change everything. That standing up for what was right mattered more than wealth or status. That love built on mutual respect and genuine partnership could weather any storm. The details would blur over the decades, but the essential truth remained. A cowboy who did not care about the consequences faced down the richest man in the county for a woman he barely knew, and in doing so, found everything he had been searching for his entire life. When Lucas died in 1922 at the age of 66, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, Victoria held his hand and whispered thank you one last time for walking into her life when she needed him most. She followed him 4 years later, her last words a smile and the whispered name of the cowboy who had saved her and loved her and given her a life more beautiful than she could have imagined. They were buried side by side in a cemetery overlooking the bay, their headstones simple but marked with words Victoria had chosen years earlier. Here lie two souls who found each other when it mattered most. The house they had lived in for 40 years was inherited by Emma, who turned it into a home for women fleeing abusive situations, ensuring that her parents' legacy of courage and compassion continued. The stable Lucas had built became one of the most prestigious equestrian facilities in California, run by Michael and eventually his sons, all of whom learned that treating animals and people with respect was the foundation of any successful business. Sarah's dress shop remained a fixture in the Mission District for another generation, employing women who needed a second chance and creating beauty from fabric and thread. The story of Victoria and Lucas became more than just family history. It became a reminder that in even the darkest moments, courage could emerge from unexpected places. That one person standing up to injustice could change the trajectory of multiple lives. That love was not about ownership or control, but about choosing each other, every day, with open eyes and willing hearts. Their great-grandchildren would tell their children about the cowboy who faced down a rich man for a stranger, and how that moment of courage rippled forward through time, creating waves of positive change that touched hundreds of lives. In the end, what mattered most was not the dramatic confrontation or the dangerous escape, or even the decade upon decade of loving partnership. What mattered was the simple choice to help when help was needed, to stand up when standing up was dangerous, and to believe that every person, regardless of gender or status or wealth, deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Lucas Crawford and Victoria Owens lived those values every day of their marriage, and in doing so, created something far more valuable than money or power. They created a legacy of love that would endure long after their names faded from memory, a testament to what was possible when courage met compassion at exactly the right moment in time.